Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight I'm joined by two of my great friends, specifically Brandy and Dee of Around the World with Brandy and Dee. And so Brandy Weaver and Dee Peers, the two co-hosts of Around the World with Brandy and Dee, are joining me tonight for the beginning of a new series. And that series is designed to answer the question, how will people in the U.S. react to the end of neoliberalism? And this is part one of that series, which promises to be a fascinating one, okay, at least for me.
Yes, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Brandy, for coming.
And you know, Joe, I keep thinking some people don't even know the system's name is neoliberalism.
That's true. Some people don't know its name, okay, it's neoliberalism.
Yeah.
So, do we want to talk about how neoliberalism started?
Yes.
Okay. So neoliberalism really started way back in the 1940s with a very small group of people who got together, a bunch of intellectuals, and who were supported by some American foundations, including the Rockefeller Foundation. And what this group of people did is they devised the ideological basis of a new system, okay, of economics. That system of economics was based in great part on a group of people known as the Austrian economists, particularly Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. And they were two of the people who started the Pellerin Society, it was called. And they met in relatively small conferences during the late 1940s. But a lot of influential people were at those conferences. In particular, Milton Friedman was a prominent American economist who participated in that group. He was not an Austrian philosophy economist, as Hayek and von Mises was, but he had a lot in common with them. And he later became very influential here in America as for introducing sort of a right-wing version, okay, of Keynesianism. But there were other very prominent people involved in the society. There was Ludwig Erhard, who later became the chancellor, okay, of West Germany, and who pursued a lot of the economic ideas that originated in the society. There was also Karl Popper, I'm not sure, and I say this as someone who's to a great degree a follower of Karl Popper. I don't think that Karl Popper really agreed with the principles of the Mont Pelerin Society, but Karl Popper owed a debt of gratitude to Hayek. And the reason why is when no one else would publish Popper's important works in World War II, uh, they were published, okay, in an economics journal that Hayek was the editor of. So Hayek was pushing Popper's work because his work on democracy seemed to Hayek be favorable to the economic views, okay, of Hayek. But this was not actually the case, but it seemed that way. So Hayek supported him very, very strongly. Okay, and Popper was a person, okay, who was loyal to his friends. And so when Hayek asked him to participate in the society, he agreed. He was never front and center when it came to the philosophic ideas of the society and when it came to the economic ideas of the society. But over the years, as the society developed, more and more economists became familiar with those ideas. And a lot of those ideas were free market kinds of fundamentalist ideas. They were different from the market fundamentalism of the 19th century in that 19th century market philosophy was very, very anti-government. But the Mont Pelerin Society version, okay, of market fundamentalism was such that it envisioned that the free marketers would actually use the government to support themselves and were happy to work in politics to have the government give them all sorts of tax breaks, for example, and to give them subsidies in certain kinds of industries. Well, I can make this a very long story, and I don't want to make it a very long story in spite of the fact that this is a series. But what you have to know is that the ideas of the Mont Pelerin Society gained some currency during the 1950s, even though the group was considered something of a mad group. And then by the 1960s, the ideas were getting halfway respectable. I think they grew for two reasons. First of all, as the philosophy was applied in West Germany, okay, by Erhard during the 1950s and the early 1960s, they appeared to be at the base of the economic miracle, so-called, in Germany, okay, at that time. So for that reason, they had a good reputation, even though Erhard's version of the Mont Pelerin Society, okay, ideas was not as market fundamentalist at all as the von Mises version or the Hayek version or the Milton Friedman version. But still, it was associated with the Mont Pelerin ideas, so it brought those forward. And then the other big factor in bringing this school of thought to prominence was that the ideas of Milton Friedman were becoming more and more popular here in the United States. There was very popular lecture tours that were going on where the main exponent of Keynesianism in those years, Paul Samuelson, would tour with Milton Friedman, and they would debate each other on fundamental ideas. I actually heard one of those debates in person, at Cornell during the late 1950s. Okay, these debates went on during the 1950s and 1960s. It always seemed to me that Samuelson wiped the floor with him. But still, I think Friedman was benefiting from the debates, and the University of Chicago School of Economics was benefiting from the debates, but because of the currency it was getting, and because the Republican Party was giving support to those views.
Hmm.
Specifically, Bill Buckley was very important in supporting the views, of Friedman over a long period of time, and brought those views into the conservative movement here in the United States. Now, they still weren't very successful in capturing the policymakers, but during the decade of the 70s, we had the phenomenon of stagflation here in the United States. That is, we had both the stagnating economy and inflation occurring at the same time. And the Keynesian theorists at that time were not able to account for the phenomenon, and they were not able to recommend the policies that the politicians were willing to follow that could explain the phenomenon. Okay. Anyway, stagflation ended when Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker as the head of the Federal Reserve. And Volcker was viewed, this is not completely true. In other words, what I'm about to say is not really true. But Volcker was viewed as having taken the starch out of inflation by raising interest rates up to the sky. The overnight rate at one time hit 20%. It was that high. The effect of all this raising of interest rates was eventually to break the economy, cause a serious recession at the end of Jimmy Carter's term and the start of Reagan's term. And Reagan wasn't blamed for this because, after all, he hadn't appointed Paul Volcker. It was Carter who appointed Paul Volcker. So, in one of the ironies of history, one of the things Jimmy Carter did as president, which was very good from the standpoint of taking the starch out of inflation, was that he deregulated natural gas exploration and also development. That brought the price of oil down. It created a supply crisis for oil. And it brought the price of oil down. And the Saudis had been driving the price of oil for profits. And the rising oil prices were key to the inflation of the late 70s, and early 80s. So Carter's deregulation was eventually effective in breaking the price of oil. But by then, Ronald Reagan was the president, so he got the credit for that instead of Jimmy Carter getting the credit for that. And Paul Volcker got the credit for it also, because people didn't think it was Jimmy Carter's reform that actually broke the inflation. They bought into the gospel, of monetarism, which was one of the main philosophies coming out of Friedman's work, and which informed the Fed activity during the 1980s. So basically, monetarism and the rising of interest rates up to the skies was given the credit for breaking the inflation. and for solving a problem that the Keynesians could not solve. So there was a crisis of confidence in Keynesianism at that time, and Keynesianism was at the root, okay, of liberal economics, it was called. Okay, essentially lefty economics here in the United States, using government to fulfill the public purpose. So there was an intellectual crisis in that part, okay, of economics, and people were looking for new kinds of explanations and new kinds of thinking, even though they weren't very new. As we know, the non-tolerant society started in the 1940s and was using economic theory from the 1920s and 1930s. But nevertheless, the gospel of market fundamentalism, a la Milton Friedman, was seen as a new form of thinking, and monetarism was also seen as a new form, okay, of thinking. And so that became very popular in policy circles during the 1980s, and very popular in the Reagan administration that had benefited from these policies. Okay, so all through the 1980s, people were trying to rationalize the policies of Margaret Thatcher in England and Ronald Reagan here in the United States in terms of a philosophy of political economy that was supposedly consistent with the successes of those particular regimes. Stepping into this breach were people like Peter G. Peterson, who at the time was the head of the International Institute of Economics, which later became the Peterson Institute of International Economics, but that's a later story. During the 1980s, it was the Peterson Institute. And what the Peterson Institute did was to take the market philosophies of Milton Friedman and Hayek to some degree, and to rationalize these into a set of political principles, really political economic principles, that this group of people wanted to apply to the entire world. That rationalization of the market fundamentalism of Friedman and the Chicago School became known as the Washington Consensus. And the principles of the Washington Consensus was stated very clearly by the Peterson Institute of Economics in some papers that were published there during the latter part of the 1980s. Now, these principles, of course, gave support to the way the Reagan administration was managing economics here in the United States, and also to the way Bill Clinton wanted to manage economics during the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how neoliberalism took root here in the United States at first. But the significance of the philosophy went far beyond the United States, because the institutions that the United States had put together for helping other nations, for doing development, in the World Bank, the IMF, these institutions adopted the Washington Consensus as their set of principles for helping all the other benighted nations of the world that were not as prosperous as the United States. So a lot of the Washington Consensus was concerned with developing economic principles for loan making to developing countries. Basically trying to transfer a form of economic fundamentalism to those countries and using loans as the instrument to enforce market fundamentalism on those countries. And with market fundamentalism, of course, came the rule of the banks and the imposition of austerity economics and austerity politics as conditions for loan making. And so those policies began to govern loan making from these international institutions to the rest of the world during the 1990s, starting in the 1980s, but then especially in the 1990s and going forward into the present. And so the IMF and the World Bank became tyrannical institutions using economic incentives, their loans, to insist that other countries who took their loans not engage in socialist economics, also not engage, of course, in communist economics, but not engage in any other form of economics except the neo-capitalist form that was part of the Washington Consensus. Terms of those loans were very strict, and they went beyond the economic, into the political. And they fueled a succession of regimes all over the world, all over Latin America, for example, all over Africa, that were basically practicing by neoliberalism and making it a tyranny for all these nations, which really denied them the opportunity to develop as a development tool. But neoliberalism was a total failure. Of course, we saw neoliberalism being applied here in the United States. And we know that over the years, from the latter part of the 1980s through the Clinton administration, through the Bush administration, through the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration at present, they still adhere to austerity principles, to attempts to balance budgets or reduce deficits, to weaken social safety nets that had built up in Europe over the socialist period. It was, relatively speaking, a socialist period from 1945 to 1970, to weaken those safety nets in country after country after country, because the safety nets were in conflict with the neoliberal fundamentalist kind of principles, both the political principles of neoliberalism and the economic principles of neoliberalism. So we saw that politics here, and we saw it contributing to stagnating economies from the 1990s right up to the present. Larry Summers, one of his more famous terms is the idea of secular stagnation. Now, he only began talking about secular stagnation fairly recently, the last 4 or 5 years maybe. But this whole period was one of secular stagnation, where growth in Western countries was only a fraction of what it might have been if, say, socialist, the green economic policies were followed from the 1980s on. The growth potential and the conservation potential was really huge. But instead of getting that kind of healthy growth and the transformation to a society, to societies, world society that would be largely green, what we got was oligarchic forms of capitalism that were making very few people richer and richer over a period of time, that were shrinking the middle class and subjecting it, and of course the working classes, to extremes of austerity in country after country when there was no need for austerity. You know, the Europeans went crazy over austerity in the aftermath of the crash of 2008, when that was exactly the wrong thing to do. They picked up on a few crazy thinkers and followed the doctrines of these thinkers, even though there was no empirical evidence to support them. And so you had secular stagnation in Europe for at least a decade, following the imposition of austerity policies in 2008 and 2009 over in Europe. And really, here we had austerity policies too, of course, not to mention the rest of the world too, imposed by the World Bank and the IMF programs, okay, and the Inter-American Bank, okay, development also. They were all following this stuff, okay, and so they were imposing austerity policies on the countries of Latin America and South America, okay, and Africa. But here in the United States, consider the Obama administration. We had the longest period of time that it has ever taken to recover from an economic recession following World War II. During the Obama administration, it was a terrible failure at recovering from the recession because of the relative austerity that it tried to impose. The fiscal cliff kinds of crises, constantly compromising with the Republicans, constantly threatening the Social Security safety net, failing to pass Medicare for all policies. All of these things were sustained by neoliberal notions, neoliberal ideologies, neoliberal concepts of public finance. Oh, we just have to cut the budget. We just can't afford this. We just can't afford that. Of course, we can afford all the wars that we want to fight during this time. We can afford 800 bases around the world, 900 bases around the world, but we can't afford to pass a Medicare for All bill that, in fact, would cut our total medical expenditures in the United States by 50%. We couldn't afford that because maybe it would involve the balanced budget or a reduction in the deficit. So these idiocies, the neoliberal idiocies, were going on for decades, in large part, of course, because the control the neoliberals had over the media. After all, who was running the media? Neoliberal partisans were running all the media. And as the media became more and more concentrated, there were less and less dissenting voices that were being supported by the media. The media was supporting the wars of choice. The media was supporting the economic concentrations. the media was supporting the mythology of the rich entrepreneurs, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, in recent times, Elon Musk, of course, and Jeff Bezos, all fitting the mythology of neoliberalism and all hawking the values of the Washington Consensus. So that's my historic summary of the whole thing. Okay, I'm going to end that now, and let's have some conversation.
Yeah, I was looking at it, and Nader spoke out against it, against neoliberalism.
Yes, he did. He did. But you
And
know the irony of that people don't notice?
what's that? Because I found something else that's ironic.
Nader was a partisan of balanced budgets. He always had been. It wasn't because he was a neoliberal, but he was just an old-fashioned kind of balanced budget guy when it came to public finance. So he starts talking about all these great green programs
Mm-hmm.
and all the injustices. But when you saw what he was doing and you saw that he believed in balanced budgets, you had to wonder, how the hell is he going to implement his programs? Anyway, that was one of the ironies that I saw with him.
Well, I just found another irony, and it relates to the Around the World with Brandy and Dee show that we just came out of.
Yes.
Nader's parents were immigrants from Lebanon.
Yes, I know. Yes, I know Ralph is never Lebanese
Yep.
origin. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just, to me, that's just an irony to what we were discussing earlier on our show, and then coming over here and talking about the neoliberalism. They just worked because he did play a part in trying to argue against them, and that's why he ran. Part of why I think he ran, plus he's the reason why we have a lot of the consumer protection agencies, was the work he did in the
Yes,
past.
he was very important.
We have a lot to contribute to.
wonderful. Yeah, he was wonderful over the years. And he saw a lot of things truly.
Who's crashing, Steve? He says you are crashing. I don't know if it's his Wi-Fi, maybe, because let me look over here. We're still going.
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine on mine.
It seems to be fine on mine, too.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it's his internet. But yeah, I found that interesting. I was looking up some of the information as to who all was involved, and really the NAFTA stuff had a big impact as well.
It sure did. It sure did. And that, by the way, was all according to the ideology of neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm. And
okay, as was, by the way, the trade deals
yep.
that Obama was trying to implement in his second term. Neoliberal trade deals completely consistent with the Washington Consensus.
Yep.
But actually, Obama, for much of his two terms, if not all of his two terms, was very close to Peter G. Peterson. And the philosophy of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation did much to inform Obama's policy ideas.
Yeah.
And they were straight out of the Washington Consensus. I mean, Obama was the neoliberal's neoliberal.
Yeah. And so kind of on the Yeah, I saw that, Day Day. Finland is now a member of NATO.
Yes, how stupid.
Yep.
Of course, it may turn out not to be very damaging because we may get lucky. And after the Russian victory, NATO might simply just break up.
And dissolve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the other news today was Trump's indictments. So 34 counts. We'll see if he actually gets arrested or convicted.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, they got him on 34 counts.
Hey, this was the Manhattan DA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who did indict him.
Yeah.
So how long will it be before Letitia James indicts him?
Just all recent news, and you know something? It empowers his Trumpers. You know,
Yeah.
they just stand up for him more, and it works opposite to what the people who are against him want.
Well, from a political point of view, but if the indictment goes forward, and it goes forward in a useful way, his time is going to be consumed by that indictment.
Yeah, so they're, I think, trying to keep him busy. I just don't see him being found guilty, even if he is, because they just, they just do that with presidents here.
They do that with presidents, but we cannot minimize the trouble he will be caused, not just by the Manhattan indictments, but the New York State indictments, which are coming,
Yeah.
and which are more comprehensive. He's going to have to spend time on both of those things, even if Merrick Garland doesn't try to get him. Maybe even, I should say, even if the gutless Garland doesn't try to get him.
It was the Manhattan. They got him on 34. So he's got
34 different counts.
34 counts.
Yes. And I'm sure a few of those accounts are gangsterism or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't either, but so there's that. A lot of people are happy about that. They're making jokes comparing Clinton to Trump, saying, guess who wasn't indicted? And Hillary Clinton herself tweeted a not very couth tweet adding, so, but yeah, I mean, with everything going on, and then the issues that we're having financially here,
the issues we're having financially here.
Yeah.
With the banks?
Like with the banks, and then with the I saw something today. I wish I would have had it pulled up still. I sent it in our group message. Let me pull that up.
Okay.
Let's see here. Where was it? I seen an article. It must have been earlier today.
Okay, so while you look for that,
Yeah.
Here we've been talking about the history, okay, of neoliberalism, and more recently about some current affairs, which are certainly related to neoliberalism.
Oh, I guess I didn't send it
But
in there.
how do we get from there to what we're postulating here, specifically the end of neoliberalism in the United States? In other words, what's happening that's making us see the end of neoliberalism here in the United States?
I think it's all the struggling. I do see one other article that I put in there, and this has to do with medical and a court ruling. So with the ACA that they did, there was certain things that insurance companies were forced to cover as far as preventative care.
Right, and there was a
And
court ruling from the lower court that said that was unconstitutional.
yeah, and so CNN Politics posted today, federal judge says insurers no longer have to provide some preventative care services,
Right,
including cancer and heart screenings at no cost. And
that was something that was done by a judge appointed by Ronald Reagan.
yep,
There are some people who think, and I think this was probably part of the article that you were talking about, there are some people who think that this judge is so far right that he would not even be supported by the current group of crazy rightists on the Supreme Court. Okay, I myself have doubts about that statement,
yeah,
but still, it says that there's a chance that this would not be upheld by the Supreme Court.
yeah,
And probably, in order to sustain this lower ruling, there would probably need to be a shift of only one vote, because you have the Democratic appointees that would be against this. John Roberts would probably be against it because he's sustained the Affordable Care Act now a few times. So if they could get one of the remaining crazy nuts to shift over from the rightist side, this would not be sustained. Okay. In the meantime, assuming there's an immediate appeal by the administration, the old law stays in effect.
well, and then we've got everybody's high cost from COVID, from the pandemic.
Yes.
I know, like my experience, my hospital bills back in 2007 were $350,000
Oh, shit.
before Medicaid paid anything, and the maximum they would pay in a year is $200,000. But because I had Medicaid, the hospital had to basically write it off as a tax write-off. They couldn't bill me for the rest.
Oh, my heart
And
bleeds for them.
yeah, exactly. But knowing how much the medical cost has gone up since then, and considering some of the people that spent weeks to months in the hospital with COVID, and now they've got long COVID, and they're disabled, they can't work, and all the other health issues they have. It's like looking at all that medical debt, them not being able to work. It's put a strain on our society as a whole. And I think that it's woken a lot of people up as to why we need certain systems in place, social systems. like a universal health care here. I think there's some people it hasn't woke up, but I know a lot of people, they don't realize how bad it is until it hits them personally.
Yes. Yes.
And so,
But when we look at the larger political situation,
mm-hmm,
we have this administration whose central actors, many of whose central actors, including the Treasury Secretary, Director KFOMB, the Director of the National Economics Council, National Economic Council itself, the Council of Economic Advisors, uh, all of those people are neoliberal economists or follow a neoliberal policy line in the National Economics Council. The head of the National Economics Council, if I recall correctly, came from BlackRock and is still the head of that. So, in relation to this administration and the type of people we have in Congress right now, where do we see the end of neoliberalism?
I think it's going to be the fall of when the war is over and Russia has, they've come out either with a peace deal or Russia's won. Either way, us not having, like, we have, it'd be one thing if they invested as much money, and being that we're monetarily sovereign, they have the capability to do it. But I think a lot of people are really upset that there's so many people struggling here, with more and more people becoming homeless, people having large medical debt, just the combination of everything, and the what we have seen with how severely in danger our country's infrastructure is. I mean, did you see the train derailment that happened in California?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just one thing after another every other day.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you.
And I think people are just
All that.
fed up.
I agree people are fed up. But in many ways, people have been fed up for a very long time.
Yeah.
They were fed up following the recession of 2008. They were fed up when so many of them lost their homes.
Mm-hmm.
They were fed up when they lost their jobs.
It's the question of what it's going to take to get them out in the streets, like what we're seeing in France.
Well, we know what the answer to that is. We know that it's organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's a group of people who could organize the dissatisfaction and who can represent it. And we're going to get a lot of resistance from the oligarchy
Yeah.
in that. And we have to be prepared to fight that. Okay, but even if we do fight it, which I think we are going to do, I think there's enough dissatisfaction and enough of it is focused that we're going to get much stronger union movement now going, certainly, and much stronger mutual aid movement. Okay, also
Yeah.
uh,
Because,
becoming a major factor. But when we look at the formal political situation, what's the effect of that going to be? Okay, it's going to be most probably in the short run, it's going to result in a situation that is favorable for the Republicans.
Yeah.
And the Republican Congress people, take the Freedom Caucus, but take the more conventional Republicans also. They're all neoliberal crazies. I mean, they have no concept of what it would take to integrate people into a society the way they're integrating people right now in China and Russia.
Yeah.
They just have no concept of it. They want people to be thoroughly divided all the time. And they keep passing laws to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we're seeing that, especially in a lot of southern states. And
yeah, but we're seeing that in many northern states too.
Yeah. Well, and California put somebody from California pulled up an anti-trans bill there as well. I saw that and I was like, Minnesota's pretty much the safest state in the nation right now for them. But one thing I saw, and I think it was Indiana the other day, elementary school kids walked out because of the Indiana Don't Say Gay
Oh, there's hope in Indiana.
law. The elementary school kids, Generation Alpha is what they're calling them. They're like, you thought you had to worry about the millennials and all them?
Wait till you see us.
Yeah, I know. And so but it's just, and the fact that you've got these young kids that they understand it. And I am waiting for people to get fed up enough for them to realize that we actually outnumber everyone else and stand up and do something about it. But I do think the combination of everything, because I did see another video where they were going over the different stages of genocide. And we're like on stage number 7.
Stage number 7 in relation to trans people?
Genocide of people in the U.S., including trans.
Including trans, but that means genocide, okay, including blacks, including Hispanics.
Yep.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull up the stages of genocide. And then somebody else posted a video and she went over the worst 15 state bills that have been passed in this country, and 3 of them were out of Arkansas. And this was the 15 reasons why she don't want to live in America anymore. And it's just seeing so many people. It's like we just need leadership to be able to stand up and direct everybody into the same direction. And I think we would probably outnumber more of the fascists here.
Okay, but the way politics is shaping up right now, the Biden administration and many Democrats will be pushed out in 2024.
Yeah, they will.
And their likely replacements right now, unless we can do something about it, okay, are going to be Republicans.
Who are the ones, with the Nazi playbook.
Yeah.
And they're putting that into action as we speak.
In certain states, yes.
In certain states, yeah.
And we'll have those very people taking over the government
for the entire having the majority of the country.
Right. Between 2025 and 2029. So,
Hmm.
how many years will it be before we can get something done to march away from neoliberalism in the law?
Ooh.
We also have the Supreme Court, which is thoroughly neoliberal corporate.
Yeah.
So they have that branch.
Oh, I would love to see something done to where we get the majority of both of them out by 2024. I'm just not sure if it'll happen, but that would make my day for
I'm not
people to
sure if it
see that.
will happen either, but
Yeah.
that is what Dump the Corruption is for.
Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do. And trying to get out. And did you see where I posted that Savvy had mentioned your Dump the Corruption
No, I didn't see that.
on? Okay. Um, she does call in, and they were talking about voting out elected officials, and she talked about the Dump the Corruption, but she said the dump the incumbents because that's what you'd done before.
Right.
But I know she was talking about the Dump the Corruptions, getting out the corrupt incumbents. And so she mentioned you
So
on one of her call-ins.
that's the first time that she's made a favorable comment in public.
That I have seen towards that, but Eric, who is her producer,
Yes, I
is
know.
also,
I know who Eric is, and I know
yeah,
he's more favorable to the ideas, Kay, that I presented.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so,
he's also very important to her, isn't he? I mean, he's really
hmm
all the difficult behind the scenes stuff is what he's doing.
yeah. And he's also going out with her on the ground, reporting when he can. And if he's not able to, then his son has gone.
Mm.
So, as well. So they're all kind of very tight knit. But yeah, I mean, they talked about you and brought it up for other people to hear as well on her call-in show, which gets a lot of viewers. I've been on there a few times. The only reason why I'm typically not on there is it's late at night and like my husband's trying to go to bed because he gets up earlier than I do in the morning. So, but yeah, I think that more and more people are realizing that how bad our government is on both sides.
Yeah, people just have to realize
And so we just need the leadership.
how bad the people representing both parties are.
Mm-hmm. And I think, if we can just keep, because the biggest problem I see with people in the US is we have very short attention spans. And so for the most part, the majority do. And so by the time, like right now, it's 2023, and Palestine, Ohio just recently happened.
Yes.
And so it's all still in our memories. But by 2024, with everything else going on, how many people are going to remember that Biden never even showed up?
Yes.
And that they have not done anything for any of those people. We're going to have to keep putting that out there.
Right, but there will also be new dissatisfactions that are arising all the time.
And we got to keep.
One characteristic of these people is that they refused to solve anything.
Yeah.
They're always kicking the can down the road. They never want to fundamentally change anything.
Yeah.
So there are always constant things to bring the anger to people. And that's one advantage that we have. But our big disadvantage is the implications of our position are that everyone in Congress, now it seems without exception, has to be replaced
Mm-hmm.
by someone else who is not bought. And it seems to me hard to get people to accept that one, this is possible, and two, that it will really be the most wonderful thing in the world for them.
Yeah. At times it's like pulling teeth, but we need to sit down and we need to keep up with the wrongs that has happened under this administration, as well as the wrongs the other side is doing, and saying why, and get it out there into more and more people's heads as to why are we putting up with this. We're either being neglected over here or we're being abused over here.
Yes,
Why are we putting up
absolutely.
with this?
Absolutely. Why are we putting up with it? And what can we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do about it is unions, okay, and mutual aid,
Mm-hmm.
and dump the corruption.
Yep.
Those are the things we can do about it. And that's enough. If we did all those things, we could get the kind of society that works with people, takes care of people, sees to it that the values of people are governing what goes on.
Yeah. Because if we don't get them out, we're not going to have much time to stop the climate issues.
Yeah, we really do have to get them out by 2024. There is no more time.
Yeah. Because, I mean, we're seeing them
Yes.
every day getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it's what you're coping with now in
Mhm.
Arkansas.
Well, and we've got, you know, the storms. We always get storms this time of year. The thing is that, and our local news weatherman put on a little video explaining that the problem of what they're seeing is the frequency of the storms and the frequency of the severity and the frequency of more and more tornadic events. It's like it used to be to where we very rarely had bad storms in winter. And it seems like ever since the year that I think it was 2011 that, or I can't remember for sure what year it was, we had the EF5 tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri. And that's only a few hours north of me. I mean, it's like that close. It's like 2 hours north of us. And that one happened in like December or January.
Wow.
And ever since then, it's gotten a little bit worse. We've gotten to where we get more of the winter storms, whereas it used to just be fall and spring. And now we're getting more and more of these winter thunderstorms. And we went like 6 years without hardly any snow other than a little bit of flurries. But whereas we used to at least get one decent snow of a couple inches, on the ground a year, at least one, if not more. And then we went 6 years with none, and then like 2 years ago we got pounded. And it's like we see it here. We see it in the South. We see it in the warmer areas. We see the changes.
You know, we've been in my part of Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
the northeastern part. We've been very lucky. It always seems like we're between the big the climate movements and that things are fairly moderate here. I'm waiting for that to change, though. That has to change given the changes that are happening in every part of the country. But I think people here in just this area, close to DC, uh, have not been hit too hard by the climatic changes. And that has a political effect because so many of the people who run the government are living in this tri-state area. In, you know, DC, Maryland, okay, in Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
the northern part, you know, in Virginia. So we look on what's happening in other parts of the United States from afar. But I mean, really, this year has been a climatic disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, those atmospheric rivers constantly hitting California.
Oh, yeah. And then that turns into storms
Yes,
for us.
yes,
And then
we've
as it heads
crossed the whole
northeast, it
country.
goes into snow.
And
So,
then it becomes a northeaster.
mm-hmm.
Well, the polar vortex comes down deep, deep, deep.
Yeah.
And, you know, makes Minnesota totally unlivable.
Yeah. I feel sorry for, I mean, we got a warehouse up in Michigan for my job. And there's times where they've had to shut down early
Yes.
and everything. So the Joplin tornado was 2011. It was an EF5 tornado, which is like the highest ranking that tornado that we've ever seen. It was 200 miles per hour winds, and it killed. Direct fatalities was 158, and then they said there was another 8 to 9 indirect fatalities that weren't killed from the actual tornado, but afterwards.
Hmm. Okay,
So,
we've been at this now for about an hour,
yeah.
8 minutes. Where I'd like to leave our discussion is with the idea that we have to continue on the track of specifying why we think the end of liberalism is near. We started to do that here, but I think we've only scratched
The surface of it.
surface of that. So I think that would be a very important discussion to have in part 2,
Mm-hmm.
which will be next Thursday. Okay, let's briefly go over some of the comments.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, so Day joined us here tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So Day says, "Thank you, Brandy. You only have once to make a good impression." Thanks. No
I'll
pressure.
let her know we'd be getting started here in just a moment. Sometimes it's trying to end our show and coming over onto yours. It takes us a few minutes.
I know. So Day says, "Hello, Joe." Steve says, "Hello, Doc. I just thought it started with Thatcher. Thanks for the insight." Well, there's even some more insight with respect to this, too. The first president to really tout fiscal responsibility as austerity was Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it because I love Jimmy Carter. He is such a wonderful person. But his presidency was hamstrung, and he was way off base because he constantly emphasized that fiscal responsibility business. Okay, it was the source of his fighting with the labor unions, which undermined his presidency, okay, in my view, and led to his defeat by Ronald Reagan. Steve Wolfbrand says German people are very intelligent. Yes, German people are enormously intelligent. There are countless examples, okay, of their intelligence. No one has ever said that German people are not very intelligent. There have been a lot of other complaints, but that's not been one of them. Steve Wolfbrand says, whip inflation now label pinned. I remember whip inflation now. Yeah, I remember too. Pins, yes, Steve, pins. I studied economics at UCLA in the 70s. Of course, you know they were pushing Keynesian stuff. Yeah, at the time, there was the Keynesian stuff, and there was the Chicago School, and the Chicago School hadn't made much progress yet. That would wait for the 1980s. Steve says, you are crashing, you are crashing. Day says, Turkey's parliament ratified Finland's membership. Is Turkey anti-Russian? No, Turkey is not anti-Russian, but what Turkey did is there was some deal cut by the United States and Turkey. And basically, Turkey got bribed by the United States. Turkey is one of those nations that is bribable by either side. KL says, fine here. Day says, we'll connect good here. He says, indictments are just questioning. I'm hoping for his arrest. Screw his followers. But the dangerous Florida crocodile is lurking to strike. We need Trump in a way. I agree with that, Day, that
Mm-hmm.
the dangerous Florida crocodile, also known as Death Santis.
Yeah, I think a lot of us see him for what he is
Yes.
and would honestly, we don't like Trump, but we know that he's safer than DeSantis, sadly.
I think Trump is safer, okay, than
Mhm.
DeSantis because you won't have someone at the top who is trying to systematically institute a thoroughgoing fascist uh, dictatorship.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump is he's persistent
And he's awful and he's greedy.
and he's greedy, but he's not systematic and he's not really thoroughgoing. And with
And,
him, that is our hope.
and see, the problem with DeSantis is he participated in what's that base that we have that we still have prisoners in? Huh?
Gitmo.
Yeah. He was basically an attorney for Gitmo.
Oh God,
And he helped cover shit up.
what a horrible person.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was a military attorney for Gitmo, I think, from what I've heard. So he was involved with stuff, the human rights abuses down there.
So Day says, I want neoliberalism to crash. We do too, Day Day. We do too.
Yeah.
And she says, is Day Day a she?
Yeah.
Okay, she says, but neoliberalism is causing fascism via the unregulated power of corporations. I entirely agree with that, of course. I think that neoliberalism is the road to fascism.
Mm-hmm.
It says, I caught one of your older Dump the Corruption live streams. Nothing is more important, thank you, Day Day, than to end the marriage of politics to corporations. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
And,
then it says BlackRock, as in Eric Prince, also known as Knights Templar, also known as neo-Christo-fascism. Well, no, BlackRock, the Wall Street firm that is totally tied up with the real estate market, is trying to buy all the private houses in the United States and turn them into rental properties. That BlackRock.
while you're reading that, I'm going to look up something.
Okay, go ahead. Day says, especially with gun deregulation, they want us to kill each other. So it will make it easier for the GOP to implement martial law and overthrow the federal government, in my humble opinion. I think there's much truth to that, Day. I think that is what they want to do. They're looking for martial law.
Okay.
As America reeks of Nazi playbook. Red states. Okay, go ahead.
I think what she was referring to as far as Eric Prince, that's Blackwater. So.
Oh, yes, I think it is. It's Blackwater.
Yeah.
You know, it's known as XI.
Yeah.
It changed its name.
Blackwater, isn't that the company that we were sending over to Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
the company.
Yeah.
The company of mercenaries
Mm-hmm.
run by Betsy DeVos's brother.
Yeah.
Yes, Eric Prince is Betsy DeVos's brother.
Yeah. Blackwater or BlackRock is ran by Eric, or not Eric, Fink. What's his first name? Larry Fink.
Yeah, it could be Larry Fink. I certainly recognize the name Larry Fink. I don't know if if he's the head of BlackRock
Yeah,
or not, but
he is. He's the
somebody very
CEO.
Larry Fink. Day says Supreme Court is going to help the fascists cripple voting. Well, they keep helping the fascists cripple voting. Oh, in 24, Day says, goodness, Brandy, how do you still get up so early and function with all your complications? Heartbreaking.
I have to. Don't have a choice in it. But my husband's up at like 6:30 in the morning, and he was born with multiple heart defects and still has long-term health issues due to his heart. So he's got it, in a way, he's got it worse than me because he's lived with it his entire life.
It's just amazing. Day says, even Malcolm said, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. That is what Malcolm said. Day says, just wait until disease such as cholera, legionnaires, and ancient viruses hit due to bad weather and homeless poop contamination everywhere. People will kill and die in astronomical numbers. Jeff Denton says centrists and moderates are just talking points. None of today's Democrats are centrist or moderate. They're right wingers, and they're trying to move everyone to the right. Day says, "Oh crap, Carter. He just didn't get a lot of things." I know that was such a shame. He could have been such a great president if there was some other things that he got. So Dede says, "Oh, that explains it. Turkey, thanks." Dede says, "The Hitler is bad news." Dede says, "Yep, still female." Dede says, "Thanks, Blackwater." Dede says, "Fink actually has an issue with the Hitler." Yeah, probably. Dede says, "What happens when fascists square off with fascists?" Here's Bonnie.
That's
Huh.
not a good thing, but that's why we got to try to get them all out of there, because honestly, the Dems are no better.
Yep.
I mean, and honestly, where we're sitting at right now is with Biden, we are at higher risk of World War III.
Yes. And we have to point out, I think, at this point, because they asked the question, what happens when fascists square off, with fascists? The answer is the rest of us get really terrible choices. For example, there's no question it would have been a terrible choice to end up with Trump in 2021 because he was going to try to consolidate the dictatorship that he had started to form. So we end up with Biden. And what do we get? Very, very heavy risk of World War III, an unnecessary war with hundreds of thousands of people being already killed, 20 million Ukrainians being displaced. So a country with 43 million people suddenly becomes one with 23 million people in almost no time at all. Food dislocations across the whole world. The industrial base of Europe, but thoroughly threatened. Our whole system of alliances, on the chopping block.
Yep.
Worse. What's worse? You can't easily answer the question, what's worse? When fascists square off with fascists, in a way, it's terrible for us both ways. Terrible for us both ways. So we need a third way. We need to get the fascists out of there. All the fascists out of there.
Yeah. You've got also the degradation of Europeans' infrastructure towards like them being able to heat their homes and utilities and things like that. You've got those prices have gone up, which has raised their inflation rate, which has damaged their economy.
Yes.
And then on top of that, you've also got possible long-term dangerous pollution to Ukraine because of them sending over the Ukrainian
depleted uranium shells.
Yep. So that's going to make it dangerous for people to move back to Ukraine if they wanted to.
If they get to use too many of those shells.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's likely, at least at the beginning, they won't have too many of those shells. It'll be a miracle if they get to deploy as much as 1,000 of those depleted uranium shells before they're overwhelmed by what the Russians have in store for them.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that Russia is able to stop them before they use too many, because otherwise you're looking at And this is what gets me. You're looking at the cancer rates of Ukrainians and birth defects of Ukrainians skyrocketing, because that's exactly what happened to Iraq.
Yeah, right. And also, there's going to be lots of Russian personnel there
Mm-hmm.
that are going to be exposed to the radiation too.
Yeah,
So you're going to see some of these defects in the Russian gene pool also.
as well. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I think we've had a good discussion tonight.
Me too.
Definitely covered a lot of ground, but yeah, there's still a lot to go. And I know that there's a lot that Matt, I'm hoping that he'll get to join us next Thursday.
Yes, I'm hoping that he's going to get to join us next Thursday also, and he will have a lot to say and a lot
Yeah.
to add. And I think we'll be able to sketch out our ideas on why we think the end of liberalism is coming fast now,
Mm-hmm.
and be more clear about those ideas next Thursday. Okay, so thank you very much for coming. And we will see you again on next Thursday. We will be here with bells on. Hopefully, as the old saying goes, if the creeks don't rise.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully we don't get flooded out tonight.
Hopefully, Brandy, hopefully.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I hope everybody has a good night, and thank you for having me, Joe.
Okay, it was a pleasure, Brandy, and good luck tonight. And Dee,
And Joe,
coming, okay, as
I
well.
was going to say about your coffee.
Oh, yeah, buy me a coffee, everybody. Please buy me a coffee. And please occasionally go to my Patreon account as well. And remember, even if you want to make just a one-time contribution, you can do it on Patreon. It's really easy. All you have to do is to set up the contribution as a monthly contribution, and then once the first one is made, you just withdraw it. That's all.
Yeah, cancel it out.
Yeah, okay, it's an easy thing to do. So you can do it in both places.
A
And
lot of times people think they have to make like a large donation. Just every little bit matters, counts.
Yeah.
yeah, and that's why Buy Me a Coffee is good, because of course that can be a very small contribution, because coffees don't cost that much, and not even at Starbucks.
All right.
So Day says, what a dystopia, and says, fantastic show. So thank you, Day.
Yeah.
Okay, and again,
See you tomorrow.
everybody. And we will see you tomorrow, yeah.
Have a good night, you guys.
Yes. Good night, everybody.
And Dee.